This alarm would have sounded in one of the houses of the Hermann Göring Straße in North Germany for a Nazi party member or a officer of the Wehrmacht, and this is what would have been the call to action every morning for that person. And here we are some 80 plus years later, listening to it probably for the first time in that time. Let's find out what a Nazi alarm sounds like. Wow. They have two bells at the top, or one bell holding Annunciation of Italy. Willkommen Genossen to episode 8 of Klovekorn the Relic Hunter, Relics of the Reich. This is the renovation edition because this place is still under renovation. As you've just seen, I had a gentleman come in with a peculiar item, and he has asked me to appraise it for him. And although I'm in the middle of these renovations, I'm happy to do so. So let's have a look. It's a beautiful Junghans alarm clock, and I always like to start at the beginning of things. Alarm clocks, of course, they're used to wake us up for a particular occasion like work, and in the old days the rooster used to do that job. The rooster would give a call to arms and people would wake up, particularly in the countryside. When people moved away from the countryside into cities, the job was actually given to people who would wake you up in the morning. They'd throw stones at your window or use some other implement. We know from a poem in around 1320 by an Italian gentleman, Dante Alighieri, that a alarm clock was already referenced in his poem at that time, some 700 years ago. So these are not new inventions, they've been around for a very long time. This particular piece, the Germans call a Blechwecker, or a tin alarm, and many thousands of these were made, tens of thousands, if not more. If we go back a few hundred years, they were considered an item for the rich. It was a particularly luxurious item, but by this stage, around the 1930s, 40s, they were household items and most people could afford them. Now, Junghans, very, very famous German watchmaker, clockmaker. He was, the company started in 1861 in southern Germany. I think they have their major factory in Baden-Württemberg. By about 1903, Junghans became the world's largest watchmaker. And I think by the 1960s, around 1961, the company was producing some 20,000 watches a day. not all produced by the family, of course, but by the many thousands of employees. So Junghans is one of these very iconic German companies along the same lines of Volkswagen and Lufthansa and Krupp Stahl. Quite an extraordinary German company. Interestingly, they're still going today, and you can go down to the Black Forest region there, and they've still got their ancient factory, and you can buy a fantastic German timepiece from the Junghans family. In World War II, they were very active. They made a lot of the watches and clocks for Marines, for the Army, for the Air Force, for the officer class, and I'm sure that in future Relics of the Reich episodes we'll get our hands on some Junghans watches. Now, looking at the clock itself, it's a fairly standard type of setup. In the older days there would have been two bells here. You could have one, a singular or dual. I think the French even came up with a quad with a hammer that would whack against the bells to wake you up. We have here the minute and hour hand. We also have the seconds at the bottom here, and then at the top here we have a dial for when the alarm is to ring, which is fantastic. You will also note that it's a sort of a standard clock face, but there's also a 24-hour clock face integrated into the clock, because in Germany the 24-hour timing system applied then as it does now. You wouldn't say 1 o'clock in German, 1 Uhr, you would say 13 Uhr or 1300 hours, which is why both is given here. As we look at the rest of the timepiece here, I can see some wonderful legs. They're very delicate. And a third one just hidden at the back. It's a standard setup. We have a wind-up mechanism for the alarm. We have a wind-up mechanism for the watch itself. Also, there's a wind-up mechanism for the bell on the left, wind-up mechanism for the bell on the right. And they're basically two metal springs. And as you wind them up, you get stored energy in the springs, and that's then released over a period of time. And then there's a little escape wheel and oscillator at the bottom. We then have an area where you can set the alarm, a dial for setting the time, and at the bottom here you have a plus or minus. Some people think that's the loudness of the alarm. It's not. This is a time regulator. These oscillators that control the energy that's released into the cogs and dials of the clock. They are susceptible to humidity and heat, and they can run too slow or too fast, and then you can adjust it at this point accordingly. I'll open this up in a minute to have a look. I don't know whether this is audible, but it's still working wonderfully well. They're basically bulletproof, these things. What else can we glean from this? There's a little button at the top here to stop the alarm, and this used to be actually coloured claret red type of colour, and that's no longer sort of rubbed off over time. Now, they may have been produced in their tens of thousands at one stage, but over time people have thrown them out. So these sorts of timepieces are getting rarer and rarer, and the standard clock of this nature, Blechwecker, 1920s, 30s, 40s era, today fetches somewhere between $50 and $100. There's a whole niche of people who collect these sorts of things, and someone may be particularly interested in a Junghans from this era. So that's the quick appraisal, and this is probably where the video would otherwise stop, but we have a really fascinating part of this clock face which I can just pick up here, and my eyesight's going, so I've got to get myself some glasses. So I think I have spotted it. Yes, yes, it is very unusual. It's an unusual piece because this is, and the dial's in the way, but Uhrenmachmeister Heinrich Schnaars Bad Oldeslö. And then there's a final bit that I'll just leave to the end because that's the most significant. So let's start at the top. Uhrmachenmeister is a master watchmaker. In Germany, they still have the old traditional, even today, the old traditional 3-degree system. A entered apprentice, a fellow, and a master. And masters, even today, as they were back then, are in charge of the show, in charge of the business. They are literally masters of their art. They're the top of the top in their trade. And to this day, people are still called master so-and-so, master carpenter, master plumber. There's quite some pedigree there and respect within the population. So Mr. Schnaars was a master in his trade. Bad Oldeslö that's in Schleswig-Holstein, which is in northern Germany. Now, I'm not an expert on all things German necessarily, but Klovekorns come from Fechter, which is also in North Germany, so Bad Oldeslö is certainly known to me. And now we get to the nitty-gritty of this. It says at the bottom, Hermann Göring Straße 5. And this is what sets this apart from other alarm clocks. And this is why this piece is now extraordinarily interesting. Hermann Göring, of course, is a colossal figure in history. And not just in the Nazi party. Hermann Göring was a flying World War I ace. He was the last commander of the Jagdgeschwader 1, which was once led by the Red Baron, Baron von Richtenhofen. So he used to command that legendary squadron. He earned the Pour le Mérite, an exceptionally high order, and he was an absolute superstar even before Hitler came to be known. Now, in the 1923 failed, what is now known as the Beer Hall Putsch, Göring participated. Again, a bit of background there. We had the Weimar Republic, which is a democracy, but it was a very unstable republic, and there was threats that communism was about to take over Germany. Parts of the north already had a Räterepublik, or a council of communists in charge. In Munich, a few years earlier, the Munich government had been controlled by the communists, so this was a real threat. And in fact, in the very early days, 1917, 18, 1919, the Germans, who were limited to 100,000 men in their army after the Treaty of Versailles, had these bands of private armies called Freikorps units. And what is really fascinating, it's not a well-known fact of history, is that the early Nazis actually fought for and behalf of the Weimar Republic under things like Freikorps Toul, Freikorps Oberland. And by 1923, they felt that the Weimar Republic just wasn't working. The threat of communism was far too great, and then Hitler, with some 3,000 Nazis, attempted to storm the Munich Parliament, and it was a complete disaster. Police were shot, 16 Nazis were shot. I made a big deal of that later on in the Nazi era. And Göring, who was in the front row marching with Hitler and others like Hess towards the coup environment, actually leapt in front of Hitler, saving his life, taking a bullet when when Hitler was about to be shot, and Göring was quite willing to sacrifice his own life, which of course was a big deal at the time, when somebody of a stature like Göring would seek to sacrifice his own life for what was a not yet well-known figure of Adolf Hitler at that time. This had a number of results. The first result was that Hitler realized, oh, this is someone I can trust, and he did so right to the last few days of World War II. And the other thing is, people look at Goering's portraits and photos in his later years, and he's clearly obese, and some people laugh at him for that, but that obesity actually stemmed from his wounds. He was shot in the groin, he was then under a lot of medication, and he would be on that medication which resulted in his level of obesity. Goering had a huge number of awards and honours. The Knight's Cross, the Blood Order, obviously the Iron Cross, a numerous amount of foreign orders. He was chief of the Luftwaffe. Whole libraries have been written about Hermann Göring, a fascinating character of history. So, the fact that this is Hermann Göringstrasse number 5 in Bad Oldesloe, this street actually obviously no longer exists, but it is now called Mühlenstrasse. What is even more fascinating is that in Mühlenstrasse 5, which at this time was Hermann Göringstrasse 5, this particular watchmaker still exists. So you can go to the same shop now and purchase yourself a Junghans timepiece as would have been in this era. And that roughly, I can roughly date this. I'm not sure when Mühlenstrasse was changed to Hermann Göringstrasse, but it would have been around the mid-30s, maybe something like 1938. And that of course means that the price jumps from $50 to $100 US to somewhere around 200 to 300, and it could be even more for an avid collector of someone who wants a timepiece of the Nazi period, made in Germany, at the Hermann Göring Strasse number 5. A fascinating piece for the first episode of the Klovekorn the Relic Hunter's Relics of the Reich.
Okay, let's have a look at this Junghans from the inside. Now, don't just open it up. These things need to be unwound. So let's start here. Clockwise to unwind or to take them out, and it's anti-clockwise to wind them up. And then we have, oh yeah, just pushes that up. So simple, isn't it? Wow. So we can see here that the remnant color is obviously more discernible inside, on the inside. It's just beautiful how this thing, after so many years, at least 80 years, is still going, and it's still going strong. We have the Junghans star logo there. We can just see here the one of the spring mechanisms that get wound up, one of the coils, and here is the oscillator, which releases the stored energy from the coils at a constant rate. And as I said at the beginning, they used to have the 2 bells at the top, or 1 bell. Then the bell was put inside. You could see a bell with a hammer against it, and the way this one works is it has an internal hammer but no bell, which means that this actually must hit the back of the case. It's as simple as that. And you can see here, yep, there's a little mark there that shows us where the hammer hits, and that's all you need. Isn't this fascinating and beautiful? I wonder what this number means. 37-2, does that mean February 1937? It's possible. I'm sure. Look, if you're an expert in Junghans clocks, let us know what those numbers could mean.
So these timepieces are extraordinary for so many reasons. And I don't know if you're anything like me, but dying to find out what a Nazi alarm sounds like. And this alarm would have sounded
in one of the houses of the Hermann Göring Straße in North Germany for a Nazi party member or a officer of the Wehrmacht, and this is what would have been the call to action every morning for that person. And here we are some 80 plus years later, listening to it probably for the first time in that time. Let's find out what a Nazi alarm sounds like. I've got it for about 6 Uhr. Wow. Alarm! Stop. Okay, so let's have a look at some of Hermann Göring's awards. He carried the Iron Cross in various divisions, the Pour le Mérite, the Knight's Cross, the Grand Cross, also here around the neck, very unique award in Germany, the Gold Party Badge of the Nazi Party. He had the Order from Zähringer Löwen. He had the Knight's Cross with swords from the Order of the House of Hohenzollern, which is a German royal family, one of many. Knight's Cross of the Karl Friedrich Order. He carried the Danzig Cross, Knight Order of Saint Cyril of Bulgaria, Grand Cross of the Order of Dannebrog in Denmark, Grand Cross of Saint Stephen, Hungary. He was a commander of the Order of the White Rose of Finland. He was a Knight of the Supreme Order of the Most Holy Annunciation of Italy. And last, certainly not least, he was a Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun of Japan. Now there's a very vague personal connection here that I can think of, and that is, despite all of the media attention that Göring had in his day and since, the Klovekorns suffered because of some very poor decision-making capability by him. When the Sixth Army was stuck in Stalingrad, in Russia, there were 3 Klovekorn brothers who were fighting there, only one of which was a member of the Nazi Party, the others were certainly not. And the situation was most desperate, as a lot of you who follow World War II and who understand the terrible Battle of Stalingrad would understand. Now, they wanted a tactical retreat, and when Hitler was considering that, Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, said, "Look, mein Führer, let's not retreat this valuable ground that we've spent all these years fighting for. Me and the Luftwaffe, we can give you an airdrop, food, munitions, whatever you need. My Luftwaffe can handle it." He said something similar before in the Battle of Britain, and he buggered that up completely. And being such a loyal, capable figure that Göring was, Hitler decided to trust Göring one last time, at least in this, from a military operation point of view. And so the Army Corps in and around Stalingrad, which was in the Kessel of Stalingrad, or in the encirclement, they were doing it really tough in a terrible winter, and basically the air support, the airlift failed. Göring failed, and as a direct consequence of that decision, 2 of the Klovekorn brothers died horrific deaths. So yeah, there's a bit of a personal reflection on Hermann Göring, and the only surviving member of the 3 Klovekorn brothers was my grandfather, who was pulled out simply because, a little bit like Saving Private Ryan for the Americans, because we are Namensträger in Germany, very ancient family, and they wanted to make sure as nationalists that the Klovekorn name remains to the present day, which it does, thankfully. So we've shed some blood because of Herr Göring's failures in command.